Robert Ramos realized the wild aliens held the power to exterminate whole planets, and only he could prevent a total war by taming them. The Mizarians were rumored to be a primitive but dangerous species. When Ramos and his human delegation landed their ships on the arid surface of planet Zephyria, they confirmed those rumors were true. The Mizarian settlements were little more than primitive mud huts, but the aliens carried energy weapons far more advanced than their crude dwellings suggested. Ramos had come to initiate first contact and open a dialogue, but he quickly learned that the Mizarians saw the humans as invaders, and if he didn't win them over, they had the firepower to destroy human colonies across the sector. To make matters worse, Ramos discovered the aliens were battling a devastating plague. Half their population was infected. The seasoned diplomat saw an opportunity. He met with the Mizarian leader Laros, an 8-foot brute with the temper of an enraged bull. Ramos offered Laros a deal. If the aliens shared their weapons tech and ceased all attacks, the humans would synthesize a cure for the plague. But the negotiations quickly broke down. Insults were hurled, fists started flying. Ramos watched helplessly as one of his security officers accidentally shot Laros in the chaos. Now the furious leader had his own gun pressed to Ramos's head, demanding he heal him that instant or watch his crew get slaughtered. Ramos realized his mission had just become a lot more complicated. He had to find a way to save Laros and uphold his end of the deal while preventing all-out war, even as an influential Mizarian faction schemed in the shadows to undermine any alliance with the humans. As he raced to engineer a cure and pacify the aliens, Ramos uncovered a disturbing secret about the plague's origins that called into question whether he could trust the Mizarians as allies, even if he succeeded. With the clock ticking and enemies on all sides, he knew the future of both their species hung in the balance. He had to find a way to tame the wild aliens, or they would all perish. Ramos sank into his chair, his head throbbing. He held up the vial of clear liquid, the cure that had saved Laros's life and brought them back to the negotiating table. But the taste of victory was bittersweet. Hawkins burst into the room, his face grim. "Sir, we have a problem. I've uncovered evidence that a Mizarian faction led by Keldor is planning to sabotage the talks. They're going to stage an attack and frame us as the aggressors." Ramos' blood ran cold. "Are you certain?" "Positive. We need to evacuate immediately." Later, Ramos met with Laros in the dimly lit conference room. The Mizarian leader regarded him warily as Ramos laid out the evidence of Keldor's treachery. "I know trust between our people is fragile," Ramos said, "but we both want peace. If Keldor succeeds, it will mean war and more suffering for your people." Laros was silent for a long moment. "I will investigate this matter discreetly," he finally rumbled. As Ramos left the meeting, Dr. Patel intercepted him, his face pinched with worry. "I found something disturbing while analyzing the bioweapon," Patel said. "It contains traces of human DNA. Someone from Earth may have provided the original virus strain to the Mizarians." Ramos' mind raced. A traitor among his own team. The implications were staggering. Ramos grabbed his sidearm as Hawkins rallied the security team. Together with Laros's loyal guards, they hunkered down to defend the compound. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Keldor's insurgents stormed in. Ramos fired back, taking down 2 attackers, but more kept coming. Beside him, Hawkins cried out and crumpled to the ground, a charred hole in his chest where he had leaped in front of a shot meant for Ramos. Ramos dragged his friend to cover, but it was clear they were outgunned. Desperation clawed at his throat. Then his gaze fell on the bioweapon samples Patel had been analyzing. "Doctor," he shouted over the chaos, "can you alter the virus to target Mizarian physiology?" Understanding dawned in Patel's eyes. He nodded grimly and set to work. Minutes later, Ramos held a canister of the modified bioweapon. Laros met his gaze and an unspoken agreement passed between them. Together they charged out into the fray. Ramos hurled the canister into the midst of Keldor's forces. It burst open, releasing a fine mist. The insurgents stumbled and fell, clawing at their throats as the virus ravaged their systems. In the sudden silence, Laros stood over Keldor's twitching form. "You have betrayed our people," he growled, "and for that you will pay." As the smoke cleared, Ramos surveyed the carnage. They had won, but at a cost. Hawkins lay unmoving, his blood pooling on the ground. Laros turned to Ramos, his expression grim. "We will share our weapons technology with you and help uncover who provided the bioweapon, but many of my people still see you as invaders. This truce is fragile." Ramos nodded wearily. "I know, but we must find a way forward for both our species." As Patel rushed to adapt human medical technology to save Hawkins, Ramos prepared for the next round of negotiations. The battle was won, but the war for peace had only just begun, and with a traitor lurking in the shadows, he knew the greatest challenges were yet to come. Ramos stood over Keldor, the defeated Mizarian leader slumped in his cell. "Who provided you with the bioweapon?" Ramos demanded. Keldor's eyes narrowed. "A human, called themselves the Broker, said they'd help us overthrow Laros if we gave them mining rights." Ramos clenched his fists. He stormed out of the cell block and found Laros waiting. "We have a bigger problem," Ramos said. "Someone called the Broker is playing both sides. They're the real threat." In the medical bay, Hawkins sat up with a groan as Dr. Patel removed glowing Mizarian tech from his chest. Hawkins swung his legs off the bed, ready to make someone pay. The unlikely trio followed the trail to a facility on Zephiria's cratered moon. They crouched behind a ridge, observing guards in corporate uniforms patrol the perimeter. "Human run," Ramos whispered, "but definitely not supposed to be here." They snuck inside through a maintenance hatch. Ramos and Laros moved in tandem, covering each other as they navigated twisting corridors. Hawkins limped behind, muttering into a handheld device. An alarm blared. Guards poured in from all directions, plasma bolts sizzling past. Ramos dove behind a crate, returning fire. Laros roared and charged, scattering guards with sweeps of his massive arms. Hawkins shouted over the chaos, "I'm in their system. This goes deep. Earth officials, weapons deals, the whole conspiracy." A familiar voice rang out. "That's quite enough." Ambassador Novak stepped into view, flanked by armed drones. Ramos felt his stomach drop. Novak smirked. "Surprised? Join me, Robert. We'll be rich beyond imagination." Ramos raised his weapon. "Not a chance in hell." The drones surged forward. Laros leapt in front of Ramos as an explosion rocked the facility. The Mizarian stumbled, clutching a smoking wound in his side. Ramos dragged Laros behind cover, mind racing. He locked eyes with Hawkins. "The reactor core," Ramos said. "It's our only shot." But it was too late. As the drones closed in and Novak's furious shouts filled the air, Ramos knew the real fight was just beginning. Alarms blared as the facility shuddered. Ramos's mind raced, processing the dire situation. The power core was going critical. In moments, the entire complex would be vaporized, taking them all with it. "We need to shut it down," Ramos shouted over the cacophony. "There's an emergency protocol, but someone has to manually reroute the power from the control room." "I'll do it," Ramos said firmly. "Hawkins, get Laros out of here." Hawkins grabbed Ramos's arm. "Like hell, I'm not leaving you." "We don't have time to argue. Laros is injured. He needs you." A nearby explosion rocked the floor. Novak's drones were closing in. Hawkins' heart made. "Fine, but you better make it out alive, you hear me?" Ramos and Hawkins plunged deeper into the facility, ducking and weaving through a hail of plasma bolts. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The control room loomed ahead, guarded by a squad of Novak's elite troops. "Damn it," Hawkins hissed. "We'll never make it through." They charged forward, firing on the run, the air filled with sizzling energy beams. Ramos dove and rolled, taking out 2 guards. Hawkins dropped another with a precise headshot. But they were outnumbered. A bolt caught Hawkins in the shoulder, spinning him around. As he fell, he saw a guard taking aim at Ramos's exposed back. "No!" Hawkins roared. He launched himself forward, shielding Ramos with his body. White-hot agony lanced through him as the blast struck home. Ramos whirled, eyes wide with horror. But Hawkins wasn't done. With a final surge of strength, he lunged for the control panel, hitting his fist down on the lockdown sequence. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing Ramos inside the control room. Through the reinforced windows, their eyes met one last time. Ramos turned to the controls, fingers flying over the interface. The core temperature was skyrocketing. He had seconds, if that. Outside, Hawkins dragged himself to a nearby console. With trembling hands, he keyed in an emergency broadcast, exposing Novak's treachery to Earth. As darkness closed in, he smiled. At least Ramos's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. The shockwave hit like a mountain. The control room's walls crumpled like paper. Ramos felt himself hurled through the air, then nothing. An eternity later, Ramos became aware of voices. Rough hands pulled debris away. He cracked open his eyes to see Laros's battered face peering down at him. "You crazy human," Laros rumbled. "I thought you were dead." Ramos tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. His entire body screamed with pain. Laros lifted Ramos gently. "Rest, my friend. You've done enough. Now it's our turn to honor your sacrifice." As consciousness faded, Ramos heard Laros speaking to his warriors. "This human risked everything for us, for peace. We will not forget. From this day forward, our people stand as one." Ramos blinked awake, his vision slowly focusing on the alien surroundings of the Mizarian medical facility. The air smelled of unfamiliar antiseptics, and the soft hum of advanced medical equipment filled his ears. He tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his battered body. "Easy, my friend," a deep voice rumbled. Ramos turned to see Laros at his bedside, the Mizarian's craggy features etched with relief. "You've been unconscious for weeks. We weren't sure you'd make it." Laros handed him a strange curved container filled with a bluish liquid. Ramos sipped cautiously, the cool fluid soothing his parched throat. "What happened?" Ramos asked, his voice stronger. "The facility, Novak—" Laros leaned forward, his massive frame dwarfing the chair he sat in. "Novak's treachery has been exposed. A joint task force is hunting down her remaining co-conspirators as we speak." The Mizarian's eyes hardened. "I've made it clear. Any who jeopardized our peace will face harsh justice, human or Mizarian." Ramos nodded, absorbing the information. He opened his mouth to ask about Hawkins, but the words caught in his throat. The memory of his friend's sacrifice was still too raw. A commotion outside the room drew their attention. The door slid open, revealing a familiar face that made Ramos tense instinctively. Keldor, the former insurgent leader, stepped into the room. His posture was subdued, lacking the arrogance Ramos remembered. "What's he doing here?" Ramos growled, his hand reflexively searching for a weapon that wasn't there. Laros held up a placating hand. "Keldor has had a change of heart. His actions during the final battle were instrumental in your rescue." Keldor met Ramos's gaze, his alien features contrite. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Your bravery, your willingness to sacrifice everything for peace, it opened my eyes. I wish to make amends, to help forge a true alliance between our peoples." Ramos studied the Mizarian, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, he gave a curt nod. "Actions speak louder than words. We'll see." As the days passed and Ramos regained his strength, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was incomplete. Tensions still simmered between humans and Mizarians, threatening to undo all they had fought for. One evening, as Laros visited, Ramos voiced his concerns. "We need something big," he said, pacing the small room. "A grand gesture to solidify our partnership." Ramos turned, his eyes blazing with renewed purpose. "A summit, here on Zephyria. We bring together leaders from both our species, hammer out a formal alliance." Laros's eyes widened. "That's ambitious. The logistics alone would be nightmarish, not to mention security concerns." "I know it's a risk," Ramos admitted, "but it's necessary. We have to show everyone that this peace is real, that it's worth fighting for. Laros considered for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, let's make it happen. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Ramos, Laros and their team worked tirelessly to organize the summit. But as word spread, so did resistance. Ramos was reviewing security protocols when alarms blared through the compound. He rushed to the command center, where Keldor was coordinating defensive measures. "What's happening?" Ramos demanded. Keldor's face was grim. Multiple attacks on Mizarian settlements. The pattern suggests human militants, likely remnants of Novak's conspiracy. Ramos cursed. They're trying to derail the summit, reignite hostilities. A thunderous explosion rocked the building. Ramos stumbled, catching himself on a console. Smoke filled the air as security forces rushed to respond. "They're here," Keldor growled. Ramos nodded, his expression resolute. "Then let's show them what a real human-Mizarian alliance can do." Ramos stood at the towering window of the Zephyrian Diplomatic Center, watching as shuttles descended from orbit. Each one carried delegates from far-flung human colonies and Mizarian tribal territories. The plaza below bustled with activity as security teams swept every inch of the grounds. Laros approached, his heavy footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. "The last of Keldor's warriors are in position," he rumbled. "No one gets within 100 meters of this building without us knowing." Ramos nodded, his eyes still fixed on the incoming ships. "And inside?" "Every room, every corridor, every air duct is monitored," Laros assured him. "We're as secure as we can be." A tap on Ramos's wrist computer drew his attention. He frowned as he read the incoming message, his face paling. "What is it?" Laros asked, leaning in. Ramos's voice was tight. "Intel from Earth. The militants have a disruption weapon. If they activate it during the summit..." They quickly gathered Keldor and the security team in a secure conference room. Ramos pulled up schematics of the weapon on a holographic display. "Our only chance is to take it out before the summit starts," Ramos said, zooming in on the device's power core. Keldor studied the image, his alien features set in concentration. "My warriors can infiltrate using our stealth tech. We get in, disable the weapon, get out." Laros nodded grimly. "While we keep the summit running as planned, we can't let them know we're onto them." As the delegates filed into the Grand Assembly Hall, Ramos and Laros took their places at the podium. Ramos's earpiece crackled with updates from Keldor's team. "We're in," Keldor's voice whispered. "Approaching the target now." Ramos forced a smile as he began his address. "Distinguished delegates, we stand at a crossroads in our shared history." His words echoed through the hall, but his mind was with Keldor's team. Suddenly the comm erupted with the sounds of weapons fire. "We're under attack," Keldor shouted. "The weapon is armed." Ramos faltered for only a moment before continuing his speech. He locked eyes with Laros, a silent understanding passing between them. "Our peoples have faced adversity before," Ramos said, his voice growing stronger. "But it is in unity that we find our greatest strength." Back in the assembly hall, an aide rushed to Laros, whispering urgently in his ear. Laros's expression remained stoic as he took the podium. "Today we forge a bond that cannot be broken," he declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. As Ramos and Laros continued their impassioned speeches, Keldor's remaining warriors reached the weapon. With seconds to spare, they disabled its core, the device powering down with a whine. The doors to the assembly hall burst open. Keldor stumbled in, his armor scorched and dented. The room fell silent as he limped to the podium. "The threat is neutralized," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "And I pledge my life to this alliance." A stunned silence gave way to thunderous applause. Ramos and Laros exchanged a look of relief before inviting Keldor to join them. Together they signed the treaty, their signatures binding their peoples in a historic pact. As the delegates erupted in cheers and congratulations, Ramos pulled Laros and Keldor aside. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The militants are still out there. We need to finish this." Laros nodded, his eyes gleaming with newfound purpose. Then we hunt them down together. Keldor placed a hand on each of their shoulders. I know just where to start. The trio slipped away from the celebrations, their minds already racing with plans for their next mission. The alliance was secure, but the real work was just beginning. Ramos leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he studied the holographic display. Intelligence reports scrolled past, each one pointing to a single name, Marcus Vance. He's the key, Ramos said, looking up at Laros and Keldor. Take him out and the whole conspiracy crumbles. Keldor nodded, his alien features set in a grim expression. But he's gone to ground. Our sources say he's holed up on some backwater mining colony. Laros rumbled in agreement. Gathering strength for another strike, no doubt. Ramos stood, pacing the room as he formulated a plan. We need to get close, catch him off guard. He turned to his companions. What if we approached under the guise of trade negotiations? The next few days were a flurry of activity. Ramos assembled a team of human and Mizarian operatives, each one hand-picked for their skills and loyalty. As their ship approached the asteroid colony, tension filled the air. Multiple defense platforms detected, the pilot announced. They're locked onto us. Ramos exchanged a glance with Keldor. Looks like Vance has been busy. With no other option, they executed their contingency plan. Ramos felt his stomach lurch as he stepped into the airlock, the void of space stretching out before him. He activated his suit's stealth tech, a gift from their Mizarian allies. Remember, Keldor's voice crackled in his ear. We split up once we're inside. My team takes the command center, yours finds Vance. The next hours were a blur of tense moments and furious firefights. Ramos and his team fought their way through the colony's winding corridors, the air thick with the acrid smell of weapons fire. Finally, they cornered Vance in the reactor core. The former executive stood before them, his once immaculate suit now disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. It's over, Vance, Ramos called out, keeping his weapon trained on the man. Stand down. Vance laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Over, you fool. I'll destroy this entire colony before I let you alien lovers win. His hand hovered over a control panel. Ramos tensed, knowing one wrong move could spell disaster. Think about what you're doing, Ramos said, taking a cautious step forward. This isn't about humans versus aliens anymore. We're talking about the future of both our species. Sir, one of Ramos's team whispered urgently. Keldor's group has secured the command center. They're working to override the reactor controls. Ramos allowed himself a small smile. It's done, Vance, you've lost. With a roar of fury, Vance lunged at Ramos. The two men grappled, trading blows in a desperate struggle. Ramos felt his age in every impact, but years of diplomatic service hadn't dulled his combat instincts. With a final, decisive move, Ramos pinned Vance to the ground. Marcus Vance, he panted, you're under arrest for crimes against humanity and the Mizarian people. As they led Vance away in restraints, Keldor's voice came over the comm. Ramos, we're rigging the facility to blow. Time to leave. Their ship streaked away from the asteroid as carefully placed charges reduced the mining colony to rubble, erasing the last vestiges of Vance's militant stronghold. Weeks later, Ramos stood before the assembled delegates on Zephyria. Vance, now a broken man, was brought forward in chains. This man, Ramos declared, his voice ringing out, represents the last gasp of a failed ideology. With his capture, we can truly begin the work of building a lasting peace between our peoples. Laros stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the proceedings. The Mizarian people formally charge Marcus Vance with crimes against our civilization. He will face the full weight of our justice. As the human authorities prepared to take Vance into custody for his eventual trial on Earth, Ramos and Laros shared a look of triumph tinged with caution. Ramos nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd of human and Mizarian faces. There will always be those who resist change, who cling to old hatreds. Our job now is to prove them wrong, day by day. The chamber erupted in applause as Ramos and Laros clasped hands, a symbol of their hard-won alliance. Yet even as cheers filled the air, both leaders knew that greater challenges lay ahead. Stood at the edge of the valley, his eyes scanning the bustling construction site below. The air hummed with activity as human and Mizarian crews worked side by side, erecting towering hab domes and research facilities. He turned to Laros, who stood beside him, Rian's massive form casting a long shadow in the Zephyrian sunset. "It's really happening," Ramos said, a hint of awe in his voice. Laros nodded, his alien features set in a thoughtful expression. "A new beginning for both our peoples." As they descended into the valley, Ramos couldn't help but marvel at the progress. Human engineers consulted with Mizarian architects, their differing anatomies leading to novel design solutions. In one section, a team was installing a cutting-edge atmospheric filtration system, adapting it to accommodate both species' respiratory needs. Keldor approached, his armor gleaming in the fading light. "Perimeter security is in place," he reported. "We've integrated human and Mizarian tech. Nothing gets in or out without us knowing." Ramos clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work. How are the crews getting along?" Keldor's mandibles clicked in what Ramos had come to recognize as a Mizarian frown. "There's been tension. Cultural differences are causing friction." As if on cue, shouting erupted from a nearby construction zone. Ramos rushed over to find a human foreman and a Mizarian crew chief in a heated argument. "Your workers are too slow," the human yelled. "We'll never meet our deadlines at this rate." The Mizarian's skin flushed a deep purple. "And your haste leads to shoddy workmanship. This structure must last generations." Ramos stepped between them, holding up his hands. "Gentlemen, please, we're all on the same team here." It took nearly an hour of patient mediation, but Ramos finally got the two sides to compromise on a work schedule that balanced efficiency with quality. As he walked away, wiping sweat from his brow, Laros fell into step beside him. "This is the fourth dispute I've settled today," Ramos sighed. "How are we going to make this work?" Before Laros could answer, a commotion near the main gate drew their attention. A crowd had gathered, human voices raised in anger. At the center stood a tall, charismatic man with a shock of white hair. "That's Silas Ward," Keldor growled, materializing beside them. "He's been stirring up trouble among the human colonists." They pushed through the crowd, catching snippets of Ward's impassioned speech. "Try giving away our birthright," Ward shouted. "These aliens will take everything if we let them." Ramos stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "That's enough, Ward. You're disrupting vital work here." "I'm here to build a future for both our species," Ramos countered. "This colony represents hope." "It represents surrender," Ward spat. "We demand this outpost be for humans only. No more alien influence." "I fear what you do not understand," the Mizarian rumbled. "But we are not here to conquer. We seek to learn, to grow together." Ward sneered. "Pretty words from an overgrown insect. You don't fool us." The tension in the air was palpable. Ramos saw Keldor's hand drift to his weapon. This could turn ugly fast. "Everyone, please," Ramos said, raising his voice. "Let's discuss this calmly. Ward, I invite you to meet with us, air your grievances properly." Ward hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine, but this isn't over." As the crowd dispersed, Ramos exchanged worried glances with Laros and Keldor. They had a long road ahead, and Ward's poisonous rhetoric was just the beginning of their troubles. In the following days, tensions continued to simmer. Ramos worked tirelessly, mediating disputes and trying to foster understanding between humans and Mizarians. But for every step forward, it seemed they took 2 steps back. Late one night, as Ramos pored over reports in his office, an urgent call came in from Keldor. "We've got trouble," the security chief said, his voice tight. "Ward's followers are sabotaging the joint hydroponic facility. We're moving to intercept." Ramos cursed, grabbing his coat. "I'm on my way. Try to de-escalate if you can." He raced through the darkened streets of the colony, his heart pounding. As he neared the facility, he heard the crack of weapons fire. Rounding a corner, he saw Keldor's security forces engaged in a firefight with Ward's militants. Mizarian and human colonists cowered behind barricades, caught in the crossfire. Ramos ducked behind a low wall, his mind racing. How had it come to this? And more importantly, how could he stop it before everything they'd worked for went up in flames? Smoke. Ramos surveyed the aftermath of the firefight, his heart heavy. The hydroponic facility stood scarred but intact, a testament to the quick action of Keldor's security forces. As the last embers died out, he knew this incident marked a turning point. In the days that followed, Ramos and Laros convened an emergency meeting. The colony's conference room buzzed with tension as human and Mizarian leaders faced each other across the table. "We can't go on like this," Ramos said, his voice firm. "Security measures aren't enough. We need to address the root of the problem." Laros nodded, his compound eyes scanning the room. "Agreed, but how?" Ramos leaned forward, passion evident in his voice. "A cultural exchange program. We bring our people together, not just to work side by side, but to truly understand each other." The proposal met with immediate resistance. A human representative scoffed, "You expect us to hold hands and sing songs?" "This isn't about sentimentality," Ramos countered. "It's about survival. We either learn to coexist or we tear ourselves apart." Over the next weeks, Ramos worked tirelessly to bring his vision to life. He recruited Dr. Elena Vasquez, a brilliant anthropologist, to lead the human side of the program. Her Mizarian counterpart, Elder Zixtal, brought centuries of wisdom to the table. The first Cultural Immersion Center rose on the border between human and Mizarian sectors. Its architecture blended styles from both worlds, sleek human lines intertwined with the organic curves favored by Mizarians. On opening day, Ramos stood before the first group of participants. Humans shifted uncomfortably next to their Mizarian counterparts, the air thick with mistrust. "I know there won't be easy," Rudin, Ramos began, "but what you do here will shape the future of both our species." As the program got underway, tensions ran high. In one of the communal living spaces, Silas Ward, the very man who had led the attack on the hydroponic facility, found himself face-to-face with Tarok, a young Mizarian warrior. "I won't share quarters with some overgrown bug," Ward spat. Dr. Vasquez stepped between them. "Gentlemen, this is precisely why you're here. Your assignment is to find 3 things you have in common by the end of the day." The two glared at each other but grudgingly complied. As weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. Ward and Tarok, forced to interact, started to see beyond their preconceptions. One evening, Ramos walked in on them, engaged in an animated discussion. "You're telling me your people have been spacefaring for over 1,000 years?" Ward asked, his eyes wide with genuine curiosity. Tarok nodded. "And yet the ingenuity of human engineering still amazes me. Your adaptability is impressive." Ramos smiled to himself as he quietly backed out of the room. The success of Ward and Tarok's unlikely friendship rippled through the colony. Other participants began to form bonds, sharing stories, traditions, and dreams. In the colony's central plaza, a new structure began to take shape. Human architects worked alongside Mizarian artisans, blending their styles into something entirely new. The resulting building was a testament to what they could achieve together, a harmonious fusion of form and function that spoke to both species. As the first group of participants graduated from the program, Ramos and Laros watched with pride. The change was palpable. Where once there had been suspicion and fear, now there was curiosity and respect. But their work was far from finished. As they expanded the program to other settlements, new challenges emerged. In one of their late-night strategy sessions, Laros broached a delicate subject. "There's talk of mixed-species relationships," he said, his voice low. "Some are calling for formal recognition." Ramos ran a hand through his graying hair. That's going to ruffle feathers on both sides. The traditionalists will fight it tooth and nail. And yet if we truly believe in unity, Laros left the thought unfinished. Ramos nodded, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. We'll find a way, we have to. The future of both our peoples depends on it. As they looked out over the colony, now a thriving blend of human and Mizarian life, both leaders knew that the real work was just beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was one they would walk together. Ramos stood before the colony's council chamber, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of legal codes floating before him, human statutes intertwined with Mizarian edicts, a visual representation of the monumental task ahead. "We're treading on dangerous ground," he said, turning to Laros. The Mizarian leader's compound eyes reflected the flickering holograms. "Indeed," Laros rumbled, "but we cannot shy away from progress no matter how difficult." Their contemplation was interrupted by a commotion outside. The chamber doors burst open, revealing a young couple, a human man and a Mizarian woman. Their hands were clasped tightly together. "Please," the man gasped, out of breath, "we need your help." Ramos approached them, concern etched on his face. "What's happened?" The Mizarian woman stepped forward, her exoskeleton glistening with anxiety. "We wish to be joined in union to start a family, but we've received threats. They say our love is an abomination." Laros chittered softly, a sound Ramos had come to recognize as distress. "Who threatens you?" Before the couple could answer, angry shouts echoed from outside. Ramos strode to the window, his heart sinking at the sight below. A crowd had gathered, human and Mizarian alike, their faces contorted with rage. At the forefront stood Silas Ward, his voice rising above the din. "No mixing of species," Ward bellowed. "Keep our bloodlines pure." Beside him, an elderly Mizarian elder clicked his mandibles in agreement. This union must not be allowed. Ramos turned back to the couple who huddled together, fear evident in their postures. He exchanged a long look with Laros, both leaders recognizing the gravity of the moment. "We'll protect you," Ramos said firmly, "and we'll find a solution. This is bigger than just your case. It's about the future of our entire colony." Over the next weeks, Ramos and Laros worked tirelessly. They convened emergency councils, mediating heated debates between human and Mizarian legal experts. The council chamber became a battleground of ideas, with passionate arguments erupting over the most minute details of jurisprudence. "Your human concept of innocent until proven guilty is absurd," a Mizarian judge chittered. "It goes against all logic." "And your practice of generational punishment is barbaric," a human lawyer shot back. Finally, after countless sleepless nights, they emerged with a proposal, a unified legal framework that blended elements from both cultures. Ramos stood before a packed assembly hall, outlining the plan. As he spoke, he could see the crowd's reactions, some nodding in approval, others shaking their heads in disgust. "This is the only way forward," he concluded. "We put it to a vote. Let every citizen have a say." The referendum campaign that followed was unlike anything the colony had seen. Debates raged in every corner of the settlement. Ramos and Laros toured tirelessly, making their case for unity. But violence simmered beneath the surface. One night, as Ramos walked back to his quarters, a rock whizzed past his head. He spun to see a group of young humans melting into the shadows. The situation reached a boiling point when the mixed-species couple was attacked. Ramos rushed to the medical bay, his heart pounding. He found them battered and unconscious, clinging to life. "They were jumped by a mob," Dr. Vasquez reported grimly. "We're doing all we can." On the eve of the vote, Ramos couldn't sleep. He paced his office, the weight of their endeavor pressing down on him. A thunderous explosion shattered the night, the shockwave rattling the windows. Alarms blared as Ramos sprinted outside. A plume of sickly green smoke rose from the colony's central plaza. Bodies littered the ground, human and Mizarian alike, writhing in agony. Keldor materialized at Ramos's side, his mandibles clicking furiously. The colony went into lockdown. Chaos reigned as accusations flew back and forth between human and Mizarian factions. Ramos and Laros worked desperately to maintain order, but their vision of unity seemed to crumble with each passing hour. Despite the turmoil, the vote went ahead. Ramos stood in the counting room, watching as the results trickled in. The margin was razor-thin, but in the end, the unified legal framework passed. There was no celebration. Ramos's victory felt hollow as he received word that the young couple had succumbed to their injuries. Their child, barely clinging to life, now represented both the promise and the pain of their struggle for coexistence. In the colony's newly built courthouse, Ramos and Laros presided over a somber ceremony. The room was thick with tension as they officially implemented the new legal code. Ramos cradled the orphaned infant, its tiny form a blend of human and Mizarian features. "This child," Ramos said, his voice heavy with emotion, "is the first citizen of our truly unified colony. May they know a future free from the hatred that claimed their parents." As the ceremony concluded, Ramos and Laros stood on the courthouse steps. The infant slept peacefully in a specially designed incubator between them. They looked out over the colony, still reeling from recent events, then up at the star-filled sky above. "We've taken the first step," Laros said softly, "but the road ahead—" Ramos nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant pinpoints of light. "It won't be easy, but we owe it to this child, to all our children, to keep moving forward." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.